Hi, this is Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is Thursday, March 6th, and I want to talk about war as a racket. Um, the whole Ukraine enterprise is basically a racket, and I want to go down memory lane and explain why this is really nothing new. So, going back, we to start off with, we have to consider what actually was going on in that dispute between um, Zelensky and Trump and uh, J.D. Vance. So, from my point of view, there were two reasons why Zelensky acted the way he did, and there are some reasons why Trump and Vance acted the way they did. So, let me explain. First of all, this war has been extremely lucrative for Zelensky and his gang in Kiev. As we probably know, there's been probably billions of dollars that have been skimmed off, and I think it's really important for people to understand that when this whole war was going on and there were a lot of appropriations being discussed in Congress, one of the questions that came up was, should we track this money that is going towards Ukraine? And at the time, there was a lot of resistance to tracking this money. Isn't that really strange? You'd think that that would be important. The Democrats said no, 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 not necessary, and only a couple of recalcitrant Republicans said that no, we really should track it. I think Rand Paul was one of the people who talked about that, and possibly Thomas Massey. But for some reason, the Democrats didn't want to do that. Why? That's very strange. But in any case, we hear about Zelensky, buying property in Miami and buying property in Israel and so on. And it sounds like he was doing really, really well. So, but he has an interest in keeping this whole grift going, because as long as the money keeps flowing, he's able to skim some money off for himself. But there was another reason, which is also equally important, is that Zelensky was actually elected in 2019 as the peace candidate, and because the previous president Poroshenko was pursuing this war, and we have to go back and remember that this regime was based on a coup that the United States initiated back in 2014. So the whole regime itself was completely illegitimate from the beginning. And but the point of it was that what was really the underlying cause of this war? Well, the underlying cause of the war is the fact that um, Russia has been seen as a repository of massive resources, and I call them Russia the main course of the menu, but Ukraine is the appetizer. So when the United States decided to stage this coup in Ukraine, this was based on a book by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor for Jimmy Carter. He wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard, and basically what he said was that we want to weaken and destroy Russia and get hold of its resources, and the way to do that is to get hold of Ukraine. Ukraine had been a constituent republic of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Ukraine was called the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. And just to give people a little idea of what Ukraine was like, um, during World War II, the Nazis, of course, marched across Ukraine and caused, several million people died because of that. There were basically two factions of people in Ukraine. Many of them were supporting the Soviet Union, and some of one of the main armies was one of them. I forget the exact name of it, but it was the Ukrainian Front under the leadership of one of the great Soviet generals. But you had this smaller faction of people who were basically fascist and collaborators with the Nazis. and they were committing massive atrocities. And as the war ground on, it became apparent to them that they were going to lose. And when it became clearly apparent that they were going to lose, many of them fled outside of Ukraine to Canada, the United States, and other countries. So we saw this spectacle of this guy who was in the Waffen SS, which was one of these, military configurations that was committing atrocities during World War II, and yet he was greeted in the Canadian Parliament as a hero. They gave him standing ovations. So it just shows you how things have gotten so skewed. In any case, so you see Zelensky is the product of this coup, and the coup took place because Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State for Eastern European Affairs, and Joe Biden himself facilitated a violent overthrow of a democratically elected government in Ukraine in 2014. And when that happened, the primary drive for this were these Ukrainian Nazis who had collaborated with the Germans during World War II. And so there's a rebellion in eastern Ukraine. The rebellion results in a kind of not exactly a stalemate, but basically the Minsk agreements were an agreement to stop the fighting. This was in 2014 and 2015, stop the fighting and give people in the eastern part of Ukraine some autonomy while maintaining the territorial integrity of the country. But as we saw in 2022, they ratcheted up the attacks on these eastern areas in Donetsk and Lugansk, and it was very clear to the Russians that something really bad was going to happen, and so that was basically a preemptive attack to prevent an ethnic cleansing and a mass slaughter of the people in eastern Ukraine. That's the basis for what we call the special military operation. People say, oh, it's a war. Well, in fact, if the Russians had really wanted to destroy Ukraine, they would have used, they would have done a shock and awe kind of thing, which is what the United States did in Iraq. But that was not their intent. They went in with actually a rather small military force in order to just say to Ukraine, say to Zelensky, let's negotiate this. Let's take care of this problem. And Zelensky, the problem with Zelensky was that even though he came to office with a 75% vote in favor to have peace, he was basically threatened by these neo-Nazi battalions, the Azov and other of these extremist groups. They said, we'll kill you if you try to negotiate peace with Russia. So that was the second aspect of Zelensky. When he went to see Trump and Vance, he knew that on the one hand, he's got this grift going, which has been great for him, and on the other hand, if he negotiates peace, he's a dead man. So those were the reasons why he was so insistent on what happened in this dispute with Trump and Vance. On the other hand, what are Trump and Vance's, especially Donald Trump's view on this point? Well, Donald Trump saw it's not just Donald Trump, but the political class in the United States had this idea that Russia was quite weak and vulnerable, and they thought that if they provoke Russia into starting a war, then they can enact massive sanctions on it, and if they supply Ukraine with lots and lots of weapons, that they will be able to weaken Russia and eventually result in a massive discontent within Russia and a regime change in Russia, and that way they would be able to get control of Russia. So it is true that Ukraine has apparently, we're told, trillions of dollars in mineral resources, but Russia is a much larger landmass, and Western, financial interests, the oligarchy that actually runs the country, have been trying to get their hands on that for at least 100 years. Remember that the United States was founded as essentially an empire. You had people coming in from Europe who were, many of them were economic refugees, but you had basically, what can I call them, um, kind of gangster elements who were ruthless, and they just wanted to get the resources, and that for them justified the genocide of the Indians and the enslaving of the Africans, as the African slaves. So you have this kind of mentality that is at the bottom of how the United States itself was even founded. And oh, by the way, I should mention that when the Constitution was made, they did not allow 95% of the people to vote. You had to own land, and most people did not own land. So the people who fought the Revolutionary War and bled for the revolution ended up not even getting a vote. So you see, this is the kind of thing that has been going on. So I call this is called war as a racket. This is a criminal enterprise where the people who are in charge are making a lot of money, and the people who do the fighting and the dying, they're the ones who lose out. So again, with Zelensky and versus Trump, Trump basically realized at a certain point that Russia was not going to lose, Russia was winning, and now Trump made a calculated business decision. Well, it looks like we're going to lose our investment. Do we really want to do that? No, we don't. So what we're going to do is we're going to force Zelensky to give us a really good deal on those mineral resources. And also, we're going to try and make peace with Russia so that we can, save face, get out of Ukraine, so that we can redirect our attention towards China, which is what we consider in Trump's eyes, and you could say the entire American political class, their eyes, the real target. They really want to go after China. They thought that they could defeat Russia as the weaker partner of the two. They failed, and so they're now trying to change gears, and get out of the Ukraine war. But the other thing that they're doing is they're saying to Europe, we don't want any part of this anymore, but you guys, you still hate Russia, so why don't you keep going? So they're encouraging the Europeans to invest in weapons and build up their militaries so that they can attack Russia at a later date. But guess where the money is going? It's going towards U.S. weapons corporations, because the military-industrial base of Europe has so degraded over the last 30, 40 years that they're not even able to raise a decent army. It would take them at least a couple of decades to do that. So that's another aspect of this. Okay, now I want to talk about this on one of the things about the psychology here, and there's a consistent pattern in U.S. International relations, which was expressed in a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And what they talk about, what this guy, the author, whose name escapes me at the moment, John Perkins, what he said was that when the U.S. wants to get control of a country, they'll go to the leader of the country and they'll say, you're going to be really rich, or you're going to die. So they'll open their palm and they'll say, here's a silver bullet and here's a lead bullet. Which bullet you want? You're going to get one or the other. And of course, usually the leaders of these countries, in particular Zelensky, said, I'll take the silver bullet. Well, now he's in danger of getting the real bullet, and so that's a real issue for him. And we'll just have to see how that all plays out. But in any case, the essential deal that the United States gave Ukraine was, we supply the dollars, you supply the deaths. We supply the money, you supply the misery, you supply the bucks, we supply the bucks, you supply the bodies. So what was so, you could say, egregious about the U.S. policy towards Ukraine was that normally in the past we would just, take over the government and get control of the resources, or in fact, that's essentially what happened after the coup. The United States in 2014, the United States sent in an American citizen who became a Ukrainian citizen instantaneously and became the Secretary of Finance. I forget the exact title, but she was basically in charge of the money, and she had experience as a Wall Street asset stripper. So Ukraine's assets, its land, its factories, its industries, all of these things were owned collectively by the people of Ukraine, based on the fact that it was the Soviet Union that created these assets. When the Soviet Union ended, oligarchs started to take control of them, but Ukraine still had significant ownership rights, especially over land. However, after the coup occurred, they changed the constitution to say that foreigners could now own Ukrainian land. So basically, what has happened is that Ukraine has, unbeknownst to the people of Ukraine, most likely, the birthright of the Ukrainian people has been sold off to foreigners. And at the same time, they're telling the Ukrainians, Russia is bad, you have to fight these people. And of course, they picked a fight with the people in the eastern Ukraine who were Russian speakers. They lost initially. The people in eastern Ukraine fought them to essentially a standstill. In 2022, the Ukraine military had been built up under Trump, by the way. He was contributing lethal weapons to Ukraine. So when he says that he had nothing to do with this war starting, that's just not true. In any case, when the war started, the Ukrainians thought, and the West thought, that Russia could not win, based on sanctions and based on the idea that they had armed Ukraine to the teeth. Well, it didn't work out. So here we are in 2024, and most of the money that has been sent to Ukraine has actually been sent to U.S. corporations. So when Zelensky says that there's $100 billion missing, well, that's probably where it went. It went to U.S. corporations. Now, I want to talk about the kind of background to this, and that is that in 1934 there was a book called War is a Racket, and it was written by a Major General Smedley Butler. And what he said was that he came from a Quaker family, actually, which means these people are supposed to be pacifists. But he went into the military. He had a kind of military back. I guess some people in his family were military or associated with military or associated with the upper classes in the United States. And he had a very, very impressive military career. He won 2 Congressional Medals of Honor, which is virtually unheard of. That's the highest medal that a person can get. But he said in this kind of memoir called "The War is a Racket" that he kind of thought, he had suspicions that what he was doing wasn't quite right. And in his book, he says that he was what he finally figured out was that he was not fighting for freedom and democracy. He was fighting for corporate control over the economies of other countries, especially in Latin America. And also, he specifically said he made China safe for Standard Oil, the major oil company, which is now Exxon. So he called it War as a Racket. And now I've kind of talked about this already, but what happened with Ukraine was that what people are told, and this is just it's really unbelievable to me, because I know quite intelligent people, and you'd think that they have good critical thinking skills, But when you talk about Ukraine, they're waving a blue and yellow flag. They think, we've got to be on Ukraine's side against the evil Russians. And what they don't realize is that they're actually supporting a fascist government that has its roots back in Nazi Germany and collaborators with Nazi Germany. So they're actually supporting Nazis, people, that is, Ukrainians that have swastikas and tattoos of Adolf Hitler on their bodies. This is who they're supporting, and for some reason they just haven't seen through that. And if you try and explain that to them, they think you're crazy or you don't know what you're talking about. They just haven't done their research. It's really unfortunate. So I just want to finish off here by saying that what we have to understand with the U.S. business model has always been class war at home and endless war abroad. So in the American Revolution, the upper classes in what became the United States didn't want the profits of the colonies to be skimmed off and sent back to England. They wanted it for themselves. So they used the sentiments of democracy that were inculcated in the population by people like Thomas Paine, who said that there's no reason why we should be ruled by kings, and Benjamin Franklin and Sam Adams. These were the true American revolutionaries, and that motivated many of the working class Americans at that time to fight the British. But the revolution essentially was subverted by the oligarch class, that is, the wealthy merchants in the North and the plantation slave owners in the South, such as the first president of the United States was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson, the third president, he was a slave owner. So you have this massive disconnect between what the aspirations of what we think of as the United States and what it actually represents. So the whole, vector of U.S. History has been expansion first across the North American continent, and then starting in around 1900 with the Spanish-American War. It was U.S. imperialism going abroad. Mark Twain, the great author, was a member of the Anti-Imperialist League. So people in America have been aware that this is a problem, but so far they have not been able to deal with it. And the reason why Russia has been targeted, as I mentioned earlier, is because it has a lot of resources, and that is what the U.S. empire depends on: stealing other people's stuff, getting control of other people's resources through hook or by crook. So that's the issue. So that's basically what I have to say today. And again, when people take sides in this issue of was Zelensky impolite, or did Trump bully him, it's this is not really dealing with the issue as it actually is. Zelensky is certainly a crooked person, but he's also under threat of dying because of these Nazi type organizations that physically threaten his life. And Trump is no peacenik. He says, "Oh, we want peace. We want peace." No, what we want is we want control of Ukraine's resources. That's what we want, and the reason, and we have to have peace now, because if we don't get peace now, Russia's going to just keep going and going and going, and they'll basically get control of the resources, and then BlackRock and the other major corporations are going to find that all the investment that the United States put into Ukraine in the form of military aid and weapons and so on, the gun makers will make money, but the result of getting Ukraine under control and then undermining Russia and getting control of Russia's resources, that will have failed. So that's the underlying cause of this whole problem and the whole cause of the conflict between Zelensky and the U.S. administration. So that's basically what I want to talk about, and I hope that kind of clears things up for you so that you can get a better understanding of what's going on. We really need to stop what either demonizing or glamorizing Trump. It's not. It just this is. It doesn't make sense to do that. You have to look at things in terms of a deeply cynical person who will say anything in order to convince people of his agenda. Um, and the Democrats are no better, actually, because the Democrats use this fake notion of scrappy little Ukraine, this democratic country that was, um, invaded without cause by Russia. As a final note, when people say that Ukraine was a democracy, in fact, it was, the current regime is installed in a U.S.-backed coup. Um, they've essentially outlawed the main church, the Russian Orthodox Church, which is a violation of religious freedom. They've killed a number of journalists, including an American journalist, Gonzalo Lira, and the U.S. government didn't do a darn thing to protect him. So there's a lot of nasty stuff that is going around regarding the Ukraine. There's the situation in Ukraine, and people have this idealistic notion which simply doesn't apply. So that's what people really need to understand. So thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time.